we saw more people just put their foot down and say, like, this is how I feel. Like, live with it. And some people offended customers by doing that. And I think they had to be okay with it. I do see, like, now on Twitter, now on Reddit, there's such a kind of democratization of voices. And I mean, you even saw that happen this week with the whole GameStop thing, right? There's this idea that, like, people can band together and make an impact.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Christine Lagorio-Chafkin. She's a senior writer at Inc. magazine. And in this episode, Christine joins me to talk about an article she recently published in Inc. titled, "Business Leaders Spoke Up After the Capitol Riot. Will Their Voices Remain Strong?" And we talk about the response of the business community to the events of January 6th, and whether, as Christine puts it, these dramatic events cause a real surge in activism among business leaders, or at least stop them from hiding behind a professional curtain of non-partisanism. We dig into the issue of what the appropriate role of business is or should be in driving societal and political change. And when the stakes are so high, is it possible for businesses to stay on the sidelines? We get into this and much, much more. Before we get to Christine, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. So you recently wrote an article titled for Inc. magazine titled "Business Leaders Spoke Up After the Capitol Riot. Will Their Voices Remain Strong?" So first question I have for you is, was that really a strong response by business?
Yeah, I think that it was at first sort of a subtle response, and then all of a sudden the sort of numbers of responses just grew and grew and snowballed so quickly. I just had never seen like this letter signed by close to 200 CEOs urging Congress to accept the election results and ensure no further delay in the orderly transfer of power. Then all of a sudden, Business Roundtable, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, like everyone was speaking up, and it was almost this rush to just show support of our democracy, which is not a crazy idea, of course.
No.
So it was the sheer numbers. If you looked at Twitter, you just saw everyone, and LinkedIn, you saw every business leader just putting their foot down and saying, like, this is unacceptable. I don't think it was overly shocking in that, like I said, like every business wants kind of order, and any instability is bad for business, right? Like this, it wasn't a political statement at first. It was just a, hey, like, please respect the rule of law. And I think that, business did step up in a way there. And I thought that was sort of meaningful. Whether it was a hugely political choice at first, I think is still kind of up for debate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed like that all sort of came at the last minute. I was sort of building to a head, and it seemed to me in many cases came sort of even after the fact. And after the fact of January 6th. And I don't know, seems sort of opportunistic to me to some degree, in that, how much of the business response was shaped by the prospect of the Democrats winning both the Senate seats in Georgia and sort of the desire to be in their good graces. Now they're going to be the party in power.
Yeah, I mean, every time we see the transition of power from party to party, we see, and I think Silicon Valley is a really good kind of bellwether of this. We've seen it every transition, and now that Silicon Valley has so much lobbying power to it, money invested, we've seen that shift already, just like we did 4 years ago. It seemed more subtle then, and now because of the instability and because of the events of January 6th, like it was very abrupt, and we saw it immediately. We saw VCs tweeting, just very much more political than the leaders of banks and very big businesses, but they were tweeting very politically, and I think that they opened up a bit more, right? And they felt a lot more freedom to, if they were already Democrats, speak their mind, for sure.
Well, yeah, it's so... One thing that sort of struck me was, I guess, still sort of how few individual business leaders spoke out. I mean, there's certainly the collective groups and the business groups. So you had that letter signed by CEOs, but it seemed like sort of a safe thing to do as we came into the beginning of January, and the past administrations still seem to be doubling down on their story about the election and so on. Trying to say it as nicely as possible. It seems, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like, geez, why did January 6th have to be the bridge too far?
Yeah.
If what you really value is stability above all things, in the case of business, you want predictable markets and the like that you sell into. Yeah, it seemed like almost too little too late, given the impact they could have. Because there's some school of thought, and we'll get into it, that businesses actually should be playing a larger role in societal and political change.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and of course true. I think that, for me as a reporter, I follow what happens on social media, and how these big social companies work, and how some of the smaller social companies work as well. And watching, I think exactly how you say that was, why was January 6th the bridge too far? You can say that exact thing for Twitter and Trump's account, right? And for how Facebook responded to political ads and to misinformation about the election. There were so many times previously when they could have made the right calls there and failed to. And how did it get to a literal insurrection of the Capitol, for everyone to say, oh, wait, this is too much. We should have done something. Now.
Yeah, it's not like the warning signs weren't there.
Right. Absolutely.
And
for years.
Yeah, and that's why I think, not to be too cynical about it, but not a coincidence that Facebook makes the decision to deplatform President Trump on January 6th when, yes, they did, we just had an armed insurrection at the Capitol, but also two Democratic senators, Democrats won the Senate seats, open Senate seats in Georgia, and suddenly, it was a new sheriff in town for them.
Well, certainly. And, they've been sort of waiting for this time at any way to say, okay, there's a new administration. Like, how are they going to attempt to regulate us now? And to try to stay in the good graces, right, of folks who are more eager to, jump back on looking at Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, or looking at antitrust. I mean, we're going to see a lot of talk about antitrust over the next 6 months.
Yeah, well, I think it's coming from both sides now.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I mean, Section 230, this phrase that no one, when I wrote my book about Reddit, had ever heard of, now all of a sudden is a rallying cry from both sides. It's fascinating. It's been fascinating to watch.
Well, it is, because on one hand, you have the Republicans feeling like they're being censored on these platforms, and on the other hand, the Democrats thinking that it's the Wild West and needs to be regulated.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's not strictly along those lines always. There's all these shades of gray in between. But that said, yeah, I mean, something needs to be done, and everyone agrees. And now it's just that big question of what is that thing, and how do we get there, and what can we regulate? Certainly, I think the discussion has gotten a lot more interesting now that more folks are savvy about since the deplatforming, if we want to call it that. Since I would call it, since the companies upholding their actual values and
standards
doing
of
what,
use.
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But can we, you can say, okay, like hate speech is not allowed on this site, right? Easily. That is fine. That is what they have been doing and should be doing better. But can you say this algorithm, that a company uses needs more scrutiny and needs to be regulated, or needs to be, is it the algorithm is the problem? That's what amplifies all of this speech, and that's what is causing the problem. I mean, that's really interesting. That's something people have been talking about more and more, both in the back rooms and out in public. So I'm curious to see, like, how is an algorithm a piece of content that someone wrote? Is it what is it? So
that's an interesting question.
Yeah. Is it something that you could use? Is it a copyrighted thing? Kind of. So I don't know. Yeah, that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I was just listening to the Pivot podcast with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, and talking about this specific issue about Yeah, it is the algorithm in many respects, at least I think Scott Galloway was talking about this, that serves up the content, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And they were saying that at least the statistics or data he was showing or talking about was that in terms of extremism in any dimension is that it's actually a relatively very few number of accounts that are generating the overwhelming majority of this content that the algorithms pick up and serve to increasingly large numbers of people.
Well, sure, but it's not even. I mean, sure, I do agree that it's like in the architecture, and that architecture allowed this kind of outrage to be kindled and amplified. And I think it comes from all different directions, and like including even after January 6th, we would see ads for body armor being served up against some of the militia groups as these militia groups were the Facebook's attempting to shut them down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like even when they're trying really hard, a different part of the algorithm is working against the best efforts, So,
but it does raise the question is how hard they actually are working.
Well, sure, certainly. I mean, and how does that get fixed? How can you mandate a company hire more moderators or fix their moderation? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's sort of this discussion that's going to take place because it does sort of, I don't know, put in sort of stark relief, I think, for a lot of people is does business have an obligation, or what obligation do they have in a situation like this to prioritize or give priority to political concerns as opposed to profits?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's exactly why we're going to see more conversation about antitrust as well. I mean, it's already ongoing. 38 attorneys general have filed lawsuits to break up Google, and 48 states have, and the FTC have brought up lawsuits to slice up Facebook. So we'll see.
What are you? If you had to make odds, what odds are you giving?
I don't know. That's tough. I mean, it's tough because you can see the Biden administration already working on such a breadth of issues that I do think that the next 180 days is key for this, but I don't know if it's going to happen that quickly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think any sort of antitrust movement, I mean, in the case of IBM and Microsoft and so on, these things take years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And will we still have the momentum in years?
Yeah, you'd hope this is not an incident that people forget.
Sure. I certainly hope not. Yeah.
So one of the things you wrote about is that you sort of wondered in your article about whether the events of January 6th were enough to cause a real surge in activism among business leaders, you called it, or at least stop hiding behind a curtain of non-partisanism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that'll be the case?
I think that it's certainly possible. I think what we've seen already is we've seen a strengthening of voices ever since the Black Lives Matter movement this last summer, and certain types of businesses are really hitting their stride and finding their voice. And yet it's a small section, it's a small segment of companies that really have an activist bent already.
Well, can you give examples? Salesforce is obviously one that's near and dear to our audience's heart.
Sure.
Perhaps one of the best examples, I think, actually, of being led by a core set of values from the top of the company.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you had any other examples.
Well, I was going to say that I know of several that have worked really hard on like get out the vote efforts and made great statements about Black Lives Matter, like Warby Parker, but they are still standing firm in that they are not saying anything, political, quote unquote, and they won't back a candidate. They won't, say anything that is partisan. And that makes sense. They're a big company with stores all in cities all over the country. They don't want to alienate customers. And I think it's so interesting because they've chipped away at it a little bit with saying, anything that's a human rights issue or anything that's, a social justice issue is fair game for us. But, getting into anything that's even more partisan than that, right, that is actually partisan, they won't touch. So you see that a lot. We've seen that with, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on which company, but a major fitness brand as well had some struggles with that and decided, nope, we're going to be nonpartisan here. So I think it could have been an emboldening moment. And certainly we've seen some voices out of Silicon Valley become more political after January 6th. But I think that the big companies are just going to go right back to saying, keeping kind of their lips zipped and only stepping forward when they really feel like it's an issue of democracy or human rights.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that. I think that how do we? I don't think the issue of, at least me personally, the issue of preserving our democracy is political
right,
or partisan,
exactly. Right.
But it seems to have become so, right? And I think that's perhaps one of the roles of, in my mind, for businesses to say, look, this isn't right. I mean, these
exactly.
These business organizations that step forward, I mean, by and large, the Chamber of Commerce, that supports the Republican Party. That's fine.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to have a political bent, but it was good to see them sort of say, this isn't a political issue. This is our democracy. And without our democracy, we're not a country.
Yeah, absolutely.
So along with that, though, I was wondering if when you're talking about nonpartisanism, whether that's ever really existed in business. I mean, certainly the Republican Party has been associated with business historically. But I do find it interesting too, though, that corporate political giving, I was doing some research in advance of this, has really dropped pretty significantly as a percentage of overall political donations. So it seems like businesses are sort of
just this year, or as
the trend has been that greater amounts are coming from small donors, individual donors, and the impact of business giving. I found sort of interesting. It's really dropped. It's like less than 10% of total corporate PAC giving to campaigns and so on.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I wonder how that will trend. I mean, certainly since January 6th, we saw, even the big banks like JP Morgan Chase and Citibank shutting down their political funding for the near term. We're certainly going to see those numbers have an effect this year. I wonder how it will look in the future, whether that sort of influence, whether companies are just saying, let's stay away from this because it gets them into trouble occasionally, right? I mean, it's not a good look when a company gave so much money to a president who caused an insurrection, right? It's not a good look. And maybe do they need to be doing that? I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I wonder whether that's part of their calculation. I think this is a topic that sort of flows over into this whole idea of sponsorship as well, and cancel culture and blah blah blah. Is do you see the activism based on your interviews with business leaders and so on is taking a form of being more proactive going forward about maybe declining to sponsor certain programs on certain media outlets that are propagating hate speech or something like that? I mean, do you see them being proactive, or is it just going to continue to be sort of we'll monitor and then react?
I think it's a mix. I don't know. I don't have a great survey, based kind of feel for that right now. It's kind of ongoing. We've certain companies. It depends like what kind of personality that company has, what kind of values it has, what whether it's sort of a Main Street brand or an activist brand. It's I think we've seen like there's a couple different things going on, right? Like with the advent of social media and with certain executives and entrepreneurs having their own personalities online, right? They are kind of putting their values out there a little bit more. They are being themselves while they lead a company. You see that kind of the be your authentic self thing, right? And this year with the bent of activism that happened and with just the sort of extreme stuff always in the air. And I think we saw more people just put their foot down and say like, hey, this is how I feel, like, live with it. And some people offended customers by doing that. And I think they had to be okay with it. I do see like now on Twitter, now on Reddit, there's such a kind of democratization of voices. And I mean, you even saw that happen, this week with the whole GameStop thing, right? So there's this idea that people can band together and make an impact. Um, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be this top down thing. But a lot of companies at least in the social media space, which I study quite often, they did, I think the companies like Facebook, Twitter, Apple over the last month have seen those the activism come from the bottom up, come from employees, and
Certainly it's true at Facebook. Yeah, I mean, they
and
had
Twitter
their
too.
almost their own insurrection.
Yes, yeah, and I mean we've seen that in the past with Google, right? The employee walkouts, and Twitter had a whole memo prepared from employees for Jack Dorsey before he decided, okay, let's cut down Trump's account here. And I don't think they actually had to deliver it, but it was ready, and the employees were ready to act. And they were saying that this is wrong that we allow this. So if a leader is not ready to put their foot down on something like that, the employees may force their hand going forward. And I think that's the new reality.
Yeah, interesting you brought up GameStop, because I know you'd written a book about Reddit, and this is certainly being driven from Reddit, a particular Reddit in particular. I mean, this is a form of activism.
Yeah, it is in a sense, and even it doesn't matter if it came from a silly place or not. It still is activism, right? I mean, and a lot of it, the conversations online can start out casual or jokey, but then they get serious when a lot of people band together on it.
So, in the case of, let's say, of GameStop itself, I mean, was this? I'm not familiar with the origins of what the WBS is. Was it specifically targeting the shorts on that stock? I mean, they were going after the hedge funds they knew shorted. I mean, is that how? So the genesis,
Wall Street Bet.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Wait, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, were they specifically the guy? I forget the guy's name who started it, but was he specifically targeting these hedge funds that were in big short positions on GameStop?
Yeah, I think that it was. I think at first he was actually, and this has happened, many times in the past. He was sort of just into the GameStop stock. He thought it was undervalued, and it was sort of a casual thing. And he kept posting about it, and got more people interested. I think others helped him kind of put together the analysis of that folks were shorting it. I don't think it was at first very intentional to be a takedown of a specific hedge fund at all. But with others, and with enough kind of rallying and with enough posting about it, it became a huge phenomenon that we've seen, right? And now there's a piece today in the Times, a piece today in the Wall Street Journal about this guy, Keith Gill, at his basement workstation and
right.
and making his roaring kitty videos and making millions and millions of dollars on GameStop.
Well, and that's what I was wondering is, so there's certainly this theme as you read posts and so on about this, that is sort of intergenerational struggle. Hey, millennials, Gen Zs, we're going after the boomers. I've seen that many, many times. And I'm sure there's lots of opportunism in there as well, because as you said, lots of people have made a lot of money on it. But it's interesting. It is in some ways they're attacking the status quo.
Yeah. And I think what they maybe don't realize is that they are also, by bringing this thing to the front page of newspapers, they are kind of opening up the world to this information to more people, right? They're saying hey, you know in your heart of hearts that Tesla is overvalued. You know that this stock market is a hype machine the same way, our social media is. It's just one that generally is driven by people with more money and more power. And I can't help but, when I read about this all, I can't help but think of, I forget whose quote this was. It's an old one, but all trading is insider trading. It just makes me think of that, because, if you're making any trade, you think you have some information, even if you don't, right? And and these guys, this diverse crew of Redditors and others online following along, putting in little bits of money, has had such an impact. And now I think we're going to see a huge fallout from that going forward, whether it's forcing Congress to investigate or forcing some legal action against GameStop or not GameStop, excuse me, GameStop has no legal action, but against the investment funds that are working on it, and including Robinhood, which is now the target of so much ire
because they stopped trading.
Yes, exactly.
Which was, in essence, if you consider this as what was happening in the GameStop movement of the GameStop and AMC stocks as sort of a political statement to some degree, they basically deplatformed the investors.
Yeah. Now you've got Redditors threatening legal action and just so upset. And meanwhile, the ire also on Reddit is against the mainstream media for underestimating them, which I think is really fun, because if you dig into the Wall Street Bets subreddit, you see these guys are like, oh no, you just wait. I actually have, my nice, good 401k portfolio, and then I have my fun money. They're not, they don't want to be. They're not sure they don't have their own hedge funds, but they're not unsavvy investors, right? And I think that's one of the kind of common myths right now too.
Yeah, well, I was reading something last night, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, about even this notion of investigating all the Redditors that were investing in, because apparently some regulation about collusion to drive up stock prices, to manipulate stock prices.
Oh, sure.
The hedge funders were, hey, this is our game, right? We get to collude on those things. You guys can't collude on that.
Right. Absolutely. Who gets to collude?
Yeah. Those inside the fence get to collude. Those on the outside don't. Yeah, it's. I suspect we'll see more of this, and I think it's.
I do too. Yeah,
and I think it's good.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, and it just shows the power of these communities, right? And we saw it politically. I wrote about this in my book. In the lead up to Donald Trump's election, his subreddit was just so popular and such a force on Reddit that it kind of broke the site at times. It gamed like the entire system. The Redditors working on the subreddit called The Donald found so many ways to use their strength in numbers to kind of spread posts virally and to gain subscribers to their own section. I mean, it was wild, and that was the same kind of behavior as we've seen with GameStop.
Which also then brings to mind the all the BTS stands and the TikTok manipulation they did over much of the campaign that they did over the summer. Like for Trump rallies and so on.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And we'll see this power wielded on other social platforms as well. Don't underestimate kind of the power of the smaller platforms and the more niche communities, I would say, going forward. It's not just TikTok and Reddit. Like there's communities elsewhere. I mean, like, think of like minor networks, like things like Spotify or even like whatever running app you use that has a community on it, right? Like there's these communities are really powerful, even when they're smaller. When people join together, it can create change, and whether that's in activism, in business, or in stock trading.
Yeah, Strava as a force for change.
Yes. No, it could happen. I really think so.
Well, I think it's really interesting to think about. I know we've gotten way off the track, but it's fascinating to think about it that way, because if there's anything that I think was maybe a result of just not the last 4 years, but it's been a trend since the 80s. And you saw Tom Friedman write about it in the New York Times this week and Scott Galloway's written about socialism for the rich and capitalism for the rest of us. And where people are feeling disenfranchised, not just the vote, but in many respects in terms of participation in the upside of the economy. Mm-hmm. It is, you can see, how do people organize if they feel like conventional sort of political channels are closed to them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this year is going to, as we come to summer, and if, Main streets have just been hurting so badly this year, and the smaller businesses have just, it's been rough to report on, honestly, because it's been so much widespread pain in business that I think we've got a lot to look forward to if some of the businesses can just make it a few more months, really. And I think we'll see after that. I mean, I hope that some of the spirit of sort of community and banding together does continue. And I think, we may see it go to wackier places. Just my perspective on Reddit is that, like, honestly, historically, there's always something crazy that happens on it when people are bored. Like when school is out for the summer, something weird will happen, or during Thanksgiving break, that's when stuff will happen, when it's like high schoolers are bored. And I think we're at this point in the pandemic where, like, there's this like deep boredom and like just
pent up boredom, for sure.
Yes, and pent up, and it's cold out in so many parts of the country, and people are stuck inside, and they're just doing stuff, right? And so, we may see another couple really wild things happen online in the next few months.
Yeah, and that's fine, right? I mean,
sure.
I think that the argument becomes is just, you want to encourage that. At what point is too much, right? And
at what point
hopefully that lesson is one that we're learning from.
Yeah. I mean, going back to where we started this discussion, at what point do we, like, is this too disruptive of the existing systems and starts to shake the democracy again?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was, at least from my perspective, it was kind of scary the last few months.
Yeah.
I mean, so, I mean, there's we're awful lot to be thankful for that certain people weren't more competent. If they had been, could have been really bad. Mm-hmm. So, well, Christine, it's been great to have you here. You've written a book on Reddit. If people want to find out about that, where can they do that?
Oh, well, they can go to ChristineLagorio.com. My book is called We Are the Nerds. It is about the tumultuous life of Reddit. It's a story of two founders and their lives and how they built one of the most popular websites in the world.
Yeah, and
I'm a reporter at Inc. magazine by day. These days, I write about small business, entrepreneurship, a little bit of sales and marketing every now and then. Certainly about trends online, and you can find my work at inc.com, inc.com.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much. Nice being here, and this show is just so great. I'm just happy to be here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank Christine Lagorio-Chafkin for sharing her insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or a review and let us know how we're doing, well, we'd certainly appreciate that. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.